I work at a hotel reception desk in Prague, and last month this American couple checked in around noon. The man handed me his passport and credit card, standard procedure, but then his wife leaned across the counter and whispered like she's sharing nuclear codes. "You're not going to scan that into some kind of database, are you?" I held up the passport scanner we use for every single guest and said yes. It's required by Czech law for all international visitors. She looked at her husband with pure panic and said, "See? I told you, Europe has surveillance issues. Man, we're literally just complying with the registration law your country also has." But she kept going, explaining how in America they value privacy and would never force hotels to collect guest information. I pulled up the US hotel registration requirements on my computer and showed her that American hotels do the exact same thing. She squinted at the screen and said, "Well, that's different because American systems are more secure." My coworker had to step away because she was about to laugh. This woman genuinely believed that Europeans invented the concept of collecting guest information specifically to violate American privacy rights. 2 weeks later, I'm checking in a businessman from Boston who seemed normal until he saw me writing down his passport number by hand because our system was updating. He actually grabbed his passport back mid-process and said, "Why are you manually recording this? That's a massive security violation." Explained the system would be back up in 10 minutes. This happens maybe twice a year. He crossed his arms and informed me that in America, they'd never allow human access to sensitive data because it creates liability. My friend, every American TSA agent who's ever looked at your passport had human access to your data. That's how security works. But he doubled down, claiming American hotels use encrypted, digital-only systems that prevent staff from seeing personal information. I asked him how hotel staff verify IDs without looking at them. He said through biometric scanning that doesn't display the actual information. So magic, basically. He stood there for 15 minutes, refusing to let me write down his passport number until the system came back online, convinced he'd discovered some massive European privacy conspiracy. My cousin manages a spa in Budapest, and he told me about this American woman who came in for a massage appointment. The therapist, following standard procedure, asked her to fill out a form about medical conditions, allergies, and areas of pain or tension. The woman read the first question, "Do you have any medical conditions we should know about?" and immediately stood up. She announced to the entire waiting room that this was an invasion of medical privacy, and that in America, HIPAA laws prevent businesses from asking about your health. My cousin came out to explain that massage therapists everywhere, including America, ask these questions to avoid injuring clients. She shook her head slowly like he's the one who doesn't understand and said, "American spas use anonymous health codes that protect your information." He asked what an anonymous health code is. She couldn't explain, but insisted it exists because otherwise, how would Americans get massages without surrendering their constitutional right to medical privacy? The therapist tried one more time, explaining she needs to know about back injuries or blood pressure issues. The American woman left in a huff, shouting back that she'd be reporting the spa to international privacy authorities. She posted a 1-star review saying Hungarian spas force you to disclose protected health information and warned Americans to bring your own privacy protection. Cousin still has that review framed. I'm a pharmacist in Amsterdam, and American tourists constantly spiral over our prescription verification system. Last month, this guy came in with a US prescription for antibiotics. Completely normal request. I asked to see his ID to verify the prescription matched his name. Standard practice everywhere. He physically backed away from the counter and said, "You can't collect biometric data without consent." I told him I'm not collecting anything. I'm just checking his ID matches the name on the prescription. He got louder and explained that in America, pharmacies use anonymous verification systems to protect patient identity. I asked how they verify someone's identity anonymously. He said through pharmacy cards that don't contain personal information. So a card with your name and birthday that confirms who you are but somehow doesn't contain personal information. He then demanded to speak to my supervisor and spent 20 minutes explaining American pharmacy privacy laws that don't exist. My supervisor, who studied pharmacy in California, politely told him American pharmacies also check ID for prescriptions. The guy's face went red, and he said, maybe in California, but not in real America. He left without his antibiotics, muttering about European data harvesting. We still wonder what real America is that we don't know about. My brother works for the police registration office in Rotterdam, where foreign residents register their addresses. This American student came in to register after moving here for university, a legal requirement for anyone staying longer than 4 months. She filled out the form giving her name, birth date, nationality, and Dutch address. Then she got to the line asking for her U.S. Social Security number for international verification purposes. She put down her pen and said, "I'm not giving you my Social Security number. That's the key to identity theft." My brother explained it's optional, but helps link her records if she needs to request documents later. She leaned forward and whispered, "In America, we're taught never to give out our Social Security numbers because criminals can use them to open credit cards." He said that's about protecting it from criminals, not from government registration offices. She shook her head and said, "Government offices are where data breaches happen because they don't have the same security standards as banks." She then spent 15 minutes explaining how American bureaucrats sell personal information to marketing companies, and that's why she'd never register her Social Security number with any European government. She left it blank, filed her paperwork, and asked if there's a way to register in Rotterdam without giving them her name, because names are personally identifiable information. I worked the ticket counter for Flixbus in Vienna, and I had this American couple buying tickets to Munich. I asked for their names to print the tickets, basic information we need for every passenger. The husband said, "Can we use aliases? We prefer not to use our real names for ground transportation." I asked why they'd need aliases for a bus ticket. The wife jumped in and said, "In America, you can buy bus tickets with cash and no ID because we value freedom of movement without surveillance." I pointed out that they're booking reserved seats on a specific bus, so we need names to match tickets to passengers. The husband crossed his arms and said, "Greyhound doesn't require ID for domestic travel. It's actually not true for many Greyhound routes. But even if it were, Flixbus isn't Greyhound, and Austria isn't America." They reluctantly gave me their first names, and then the wife asked if I was going to input them into a passenger tracking database. I explained, "We keep the booking information for 30 days in case there's a scheduling issue or they need to change tickets." She looked horrified and told her husband, "See, they're creating passenger movement records." "Ma'am, it's a bus ticket, not a CIA operation." They spent another 10 minutes asking if there's a way to buy tickets that don't create a data trail, and seemed genuinely upset when I said no. They bought the tickets, but not before the husband asked if Austria sells passenger data to third-party transit companies and whether the EU has public transportation privacy laws. I manage a restaurant in Lyon, and we have a loyalty card program where customers earn points for discounts. This American tourist signed up at the register, gave us his email, and got his card. He came back the next day for lunch, and when I asked if he wanted to use his loyalty points, he froze and said, "How do you know I was here yesterday?" I held up the card he'd literally handed me and said that's how loyalty cards work. He took the card back slowly and said, "But in America, loyalty programs are anonymous. They track purchases but not individual customers." I asked how a loyalty program works without tracking individual customers. He said they use point codes that aren't linked to your identity, so you earn points that belong to nobody and can be used by anybody. He then asked if French restaurants sell customer dining data to marketing firms, because he'd been seeing more food ads on his phone. My friend, that's how targeted advertising works everywhere, including America. But he was convinced French restaurants have some special data sharing agreement with tech companies, and that's why his loyalty card is compromising his digital privacy. He demanded we delete his account, which we did, and then he asked if we could confirm the deletion in writing. He genuinely wanted a formal letter, stating that we'd removed him from our sandwich shop loyalty program my sister works at a wine shop in Bordeaux, where we ask customers if they want to join our mailing list for tasting events. This American woman was buying 3 bottles, and my sister asked, "Would you like to join our mailing list for upcoming tastings?" The woman's eyes went wide, and she said, "Mailing list? What happens to my information?" My sister explained, we send emails about wine tastings and special releases, maybe twice a month. The woman shook her head and said, in America, mailing lists have to be opt-in with explicit consent because of privacy laws. My sister said this is opt-in. She's literally asking if the woman wants to join. But the woman insisted that in America, businesses can't even ask about mailing lists without giving you a privacy disclosure first. She then pulled out her phone and started reading aloud from some article about email marketing laws. My sister tried to move the conversation forward by saying, you don't have to join. It's completely optional. The woman calmed down slightly, but then asked, if I don't join, will you still keep my purchase data? My sister said we keep sales records for accounting purposes, standard for every business. The woman looked betrayed and said, so you're tracking my purchases regardless of whether I consent. She ended up buying the wine, but spent the entire transaction explaining how American wine shops respect customer anonymity and never build purchasing profiles without permission. There again, because French retail has no privacy standards. I work at a grocery store in Copenhagen, and we have a self-checkout system where you scan your items and pay. This American guy was using it, and everything was fine until the payment screen asked if he wanted a digital receipt or printed. He called me over and pointed at the screen, asking, what do you do with digital receipts? I said we email them to you if you want, otherwise we print them. He looked suspicious and said, do you track what people buy through digital receipts? I explained that we track purchases through your payment method either way, digital receipt or not. His face changed, and he said, in America, stores can't track purchases without loyalty programs because of privacy regulations. That's completely false. American stores absolutely track credit card purchases. But he doubled down, insisting that American grocery stores anonymize transaction data and only track purchases. If you opt into a rewards program, I ask how stores process returns without transaction records. He said through receipt verification systems that don't contain customer information. So a receipt that verifies your purchase but doesn't show what you bought or who you are? He ended up paying cash and taking a printed receipt. But not before asking if the cash register logs his purchase history and whether Denmark has grocery privacy laws. He walked away muttering about European surveillance capitalism. I run a bakery in Vienna, and we recently added a QR code payment option for contactless transactions. This American couple came in and bought pastries, and when they went to pay, I pointed at the QR code for mobile payment. The wife scanned it with her phone, paid, and everything was fine. But then her husband asked, does that QR code track our location? I said no, it's just a payment link. He looked skeptical and said, QR codes can contain tracking pixels that log your GPS data when you scan them. I told him this is a payment QR code from our credit processor, not some spy device. He crossed his arms and informed me that, in America, businesses have to disclose if payment methods collect location data because of consumer protection laws. His wife tried to calm him down, saying they'd already paid and it was fine, but he kept going, explaining that European businesses hide data collection and payment systems, and that's why he only uses cash abroad. I asked if he thinks his credit card doesn't track his location when he uses it. He said credit cards only track the merchant location, not my personal location. My friend, those are the same thing. But he genuinely believed that QR codes have special tracking abilities that regular payment systems don't. He left still convinced our bakery was harvesting location data through payment technology, and probably told this story to every American tourist he met for the rest of his trip. I work at a train station information desk in Brussels. And last week, this American family asked about booking tickets to Paris. I told them they could book online or at the ticket counter, and I'd need their names and passport numbers for international travel. The father's face fell and he said, passport numbers? Why do trains need that? I explained that international train travel in Europe requires passenger identification for border security, same as flying. He shook his head and said, in America, Amtrak doesn't require ID for domestic trains because we don't have internal borders. Right? But this isn't domestic travel. You're crossing from Belgium to France. He got defensive and said, The EU is supposed to be borderless. That's the whole point of the Schengen zone. I explained that borderless means you don't stop at checkpoints, not that there's no record of who crosses. His wife added, we didn't have to show ID when we took the train from London to Edinburgh, which is domestic UK travel. I pointed out that Brussels to Paris is international travel between two countries. The father looked genuinely confused and said, but it's all Europe. That should count as domestic. He then asked if there's a way to buy train tickets that don't create a passenger manifest. Seemed upset when I said no. They booked the tickets but spent 5 more minutes asking whether the EU shares passenger lists with member countries. And if that's a violation of free movement rights? My uncle drives a taxi in Lisbon, and he picked up this American woman from the airport who needed to go to a hotel in the city center. She got in, gave him the address. Everything was normal until she noticed the meter and the small camera on the dashboard. She leaned forward and asked, "Is that camera recording?" My uncle said yes. All licensed taxis in Lisbon have cameras for driver and passenger safety. She pulled back like he'd said it was a bomb and said, "You can't record passengers without consent. That violates recording laws." My uncle explained it's a legal requirement for taxis, posted on the door she walked past when getting in. She shook her head slowly and said, "In America, taxis can't record you without explicit verbal consent because of two-party consent laws. That's actually only true in some states, and usually doesn't apply to vehicles with posted notices." But she was convinced European taxis have no privacy protections, and that my uncle was illegally recording her. She asked if the footage gets uploaded to a central database, and whether the Portuguese government reviews taxi recordings. My uncle, who's been driving for 30 years, told her the footage only gets reviewed if there's an incident or complaint. She spent the rest of the 15-minute drive explaining American taxi privacy laws and asking if she could request the footage be deleted after the trip. When they arrived, she paid, but asked for a receipt that confirms no recording took place. My uncle just gave her a regular receipt. I'm a tour guide in Athens, and I lead walking tours through historical sites. We ask people to register online with their names and email addresses so we can send meeting point details and confirm attendance. This American guy signed up, came to the tour, and everything was fine until the end when I handed out feedback forms. The form asked for his name, the tour date, and his rating of the experience. He read it over and said, "Why do you need my name for feedback? That should be anonymous." I explained that we use names to track which tours people attended in case they want to book future tours with the same guide. He put down the form and said, "In America, customer feedback is always anonymous because otherwise it's not honest feedback." I told him he could leave it blank if he wanted. He looked relieved but then asked, "What do you do with the email addresses from registration?" I said we keep them for our mailing list, unless people unsubscribe. His face changed and he said, "So you're automatically opting people into marketing without consent?" I pulled up the registration page on my phone and showed him the checkbox that said, "I want to receive updates about future tours," that he'd literally checked. He studied it for a minute and said, "That's not clear enough. American tour companies have to use explicit opt-in language like, 'I explicitly consent to marketing communications.'" The checkbox said almost exactly that. But he genuinely believed that European tour companies trick people into mailing lists, and that American companies have stronger consent requirements. He left without filling out the feedback form. I manage a parking garage in Stockholm, and we use automatic license plate readers to track entries and exits for billing. This American couple pulled in, took a ticket, and parked. When they came back to pay, the machine showed their license plate number, entry time, and parking fee. The wife pointed at the screen and said, "How does it know our license plate?" I explained that cameras at the entrance scan plates to prevent ticket fraud and ensure accurate billing. She turned to her husband and said, "They're photographing our car without permission." I assured them this is standard at parking garages worldwide, including America. The husband crossed his arms and said, "American parking garages use ticket systems that don't require license plate scanning because that's a privacy violation." It's completely false. Tons of American garages use plate readers, but he insisted that license plate scanning is illegal in most US states without posted consent, and that European garages exploit privacy laws. His wife asked if the images are stored permanently, and whether they're sold to third parties.